Look at this photograph. 20 experienced skydivers boarding a World War II bomber for what they believe will be the jump of a lifetime. A prestigious 20,000-foot high altitude drop over Ordner Airfield in Ohio. 30 people showed up. Only 20 got seats. The pilot selected the most experienced jumpers and turned the rest away. Those 10 rejected skydivers were disappointed, frustrated at missing this rare opportunity. They had no idea that being turned away had just saved their lives. Within 2 hours, 16 of the 20 people in this photograph would be dead, drowned in Lake Erie after an air traffic control error dropped them over open water instead of land. 2 would barely survive. And the final 2 would land safely at the intended airfield, completely unaware their friends were dying 4 miles offshore. This is the story of how 1 radar misidentification, 1 navigation error, and 7 deadly factors align to create the worst disaster in recreational skydiving history. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. We love seeing our global audience and how this story reaches people around the world. August 28, 1967, 3 p.m., Ordner Airport, Ohio. The event was supposed to happen in the morning, but thick cloud cover forced a postponement by afternoon. Conditions haven't improved much. Heavy clouds still blanket the sky, but the decision is made to proceed anyway. The plan is straightforward. 18 skydivers will exit at 20,000 feet over Ordner Airfield for a group formation jump. Then the plane will circle back and climb to 30,000 feet for the final 2 jumpers to attempt an even higher altitude drop. It's an ambitious plan that requires precise navigation and timing. Everything has to go perfectly. The B-25 Mitchell is a medium-sized twin-engine bomber built during World War II. This particular aircraft has been modified for civilian use, with the bomb bay converted to accommodate skydivers. But modifications for sport jumping don't include creature comforts. The plane has no insulation, no heating system. At 20,000 feet, temperatures will plunge to 20 or 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The skydivers know this and come prepared, wearing extra layers of insulated clothing over their jumpsuits. Heavy jackets, thick pants, boots designed for extreme cold. It seems like smart preparation for high-altitude jumping. Nobody realizes yet that this extra clothing will become a death trap. Around the same time, the B-25 prepares for takeoff. Another pilot at Ordner Airport makes a last-minute decision. He had planned to watch the event from the ground, but he runs into a skydiving enthusiast who had been scheduled to jump but didn't make the cut. Together they decide to take up a single-engine Cessna 180 and capture photographs of the jump from about 12,000 feet. The Cessna takes off shortly after the bomber, climbing to altitude to position for aerial photography. This second plane will become crucial to understanding what goes catastrophically wrong. The B-25 lifts off at 3 p.m. and begins a slow circular climb toward 20,000 feet. This isn't a quick ascent. Reaching that altitude will take nearly an hour of steady climbing. Inside the unheated aircraft, temperatures drop as they gain altitude. The skydivers huddle in their heavy insulated clothing, preparing mentally for the jump. They're experienced jumpers, most with dozens or hundreds of jumps under their belts. They know the procedures, the risks, the safety protocols. They trust their equipment and their training. But there's a problem developing that nobody on board can see. The thick cloud cover that forced the morning postponement hasn't lifted. If anything, it's gotten worse. Below the aircraft, visibility is severely limited. This creates a fundamental violation of one of skydiving's most basic safety rules. Don't jump if you can't see your target landing zone. Being able to visually identify where you're going to land is essential. It's how you steer your parachute, avoid obstacles, prepare for touchdown. Jumping blind through clouds is extremely dangerous. But the jumpers inside the bomber's modified bay area can't see much of the conditions below them. The semi-enclosed space, the limited windows, the poor lighting, it all makes assessing the situation difficult. They trust that the pilot has positioned them correctly over Ordner Airfield. The pilot, meanwhile, faces his own navigational challenges. In 1967, GPS doesn't exist. Pilots navigate using very high-frequency VHF radio beacons, ground-based transmitters that send out radio signals. By tuning to these beacons and using directional equipment, pilots can determine their position and heading. It's reliable technology when used correctly, but it requires skill and attention, especially in poor visibility conditions. The B-25 pilot contacts Cleveland Air Traffic Control as he climbs, looking for navigational assistance. He needs to establish his position relative to the Cleveland radio beacon and then plot a course to Ordner Airfield. Air Traffic Control responds, providing radar guidance. This is routine communication, the kind of exchange that happens thousands of times daily across the country. Nothing seems wrong. The controller identifies what he believes is the B-25 on his radar screen and provides heading information. But something has gone wrong. Within minutes of the B-25's call, the Cessna also contacts Air Traffic Control. The Cessna pilot reports his position over or near the Cleveland radio beacon and asks for confirmation of the B-25's location. He's trying to position himself for photography, but can't visually locate the bomber. The air traffic controller, looking at his radar screen, sees only one target in the relevant area. He tells the Cessna pilot that he's probably about 6 miles behind the B-25. This should be impossible. Both planes called in within 2 minutes of each other, both reporting positions near the same beacon. The Cessna is at 12,000 feet, with relatively good visibility above the clouds. If the B-25 is 6 miles ahead, climbing to 20,000 feet, the Cessna pilot should be able to see it, or at least see evidence of its passage. But there's nothing, just empty sky and clouds. The explanation is simple and devastating. The air traffic controller has made a critical identification error. Looking at his radar screen, he has mistakenly identified the Cessna as the B-25. The actual B-25, climbing through 15,000 feet and approaching jump altitude, is nowhere near where the controller thinks it is. The bomber is over Lake Erie, about 12 to 13 miles from Ordner Airfield, steadily moving farther from the intended drop zone, but the pilot doesn't know this. Based on the controller's information, he believes he's only 3 miles from the airfield, nearly in perfect position. As the B-25 reaches 20,000 feet, the pilot begins preparing for the drop. Inside the frigid aircraft, the 18 skydivers who will make the first jump move into position. They're planning formation skydiving, a discipline where multiple jumpers exit together and perform coordinated maneuvers during freefall. This requires precise timing. All 18 need to exit within about 30 seconds to maintain the necessary proximity for their planned formations. It's technically challenging, but well within their capabilities as experienced jumpers. The pilot gives the signal. The jump master, the experienced skydiver responsible for coordinating the exit, confirms everyone is ready. Then, in a coordinated rush, all 18 skydivers exit the aircraft. Within 30 seconds, they're all out, falling at terminal velocity toward the Earth 4 miles below. The plan is to freefall until reaching approximately 2,500 feet, performing their formation maneuvers during the descent, then deploy their parachutes for the final controlled descent to Ordner Airfield. But immediately after exiting, the skydivers notice something wrong. Below them, there's nothing but solid cloud cover. The clouds are thick, dense, completely obscuring whatever lies beneath. During the hour-long ascent, inside the bomber's dark, semi-enclosed bay area, they couldn't see the extent of the cloud coverage. They assumed, reasonably, based on the pilot's preparation and the decision to proceed with the jump, that conditions below were acceptable. But now, in freefall, they're dropping blind into complete cloud cover. This violates the fundamental safety rule they all know: never jump if you can't see your landing zone. But it's too late to abort. They're already falling at over 100 miles per hour. Committed to the descent, their only option is to continue as planned, maintain formation, monitor altitude, deploy parachutes at the proper height. They assume that when they break through the clouds around 4,000 feet, they'll see familiar terrain, Ordner Airfield, the surrounding farmland, roads, landmarks. They'll be able to steer their parachutes to the designated landing area. The Cessna, circling at 12,000 feet with its camera-equipped passenger, tries to locate the formation of skydivers. Based on air traffic control's information, they should be in the same general area, the jumpers falling through altitude, that the Cessna is already occupying. But there's nothing, no B-25, no skydivers, just clouds, an empty sky. The Cessna pilot is confused but not alarmed. Perhaps the timing is off. Perhaps they're in a slightly different location than expected. He continues circling, watching for any sign of the falling jumpers. The 18 skydivers continue their descent, maintaining formation through the upper atmosphere, then punching into the cloud layer. Visibility drops to 0. They're falling blind now, completely enveloped in thick grey clouds, unable to see each other or anything else. They monitor their altimeters, watching altitude tick down, 10,000 feet, 8,000 feet, 6,000 feet. The clouds seem endless, 5,000 feet. They should be breaking through soon, 4,500 feet. At approximately 4,000 feet, they break through the bottom of the cloud layer, and what they see triggers immediate panic. Water, everywhere. They're not over Ordner Airfield. They're not over farmland or roads, or anything solid. They're over Lake Erie, roughly 4 miles offshore, falling toward cold, rough water, with waves reaching 4 feet high. They have approximately 3.5 minutes until impact. The realization hits with the force of physical shock. This isn't the planned jump. This isn't remotely close to where they're supposed to be. They're going to hit water, not ground, and they're wearing heavy insulated clothing, thick boots, equipment that will become waterlogged and drag them under. They're about to become entangled in parachute lines and fabric designed to catch air, not shed water. They're going into Lake Erie in late August with no preparation, no flotation devices, no rescue plan. 3.5 minutes. That's all the time they have to prepare for a water landing they never trained for, never anticipated, never wanted. Some of the skydivers immediately begin trying to shed their heavy clothing mid-air. Boots come off. Jackets are stripped away. Anything that won't float, anything that will become a weight pulling them down, they try to remove it while falling at terminal velocity. It's difficult, nearly impossible in some cases. The insulated clothing that seemed so necessary for the high-altitude jump is now a death sentence. Parachutes deploy at different altitudes as jumpers break from the planned formation and focus on individual survival. Brightly colored canopies blossom in the sky, reds, yellows, blues, strung out in a line as 18 skydivers descend toward the lake. From shore, witnesses see the shocking sight. Parachutes opening at staggered intervals, jumpers clearly visible against the sky, all heading toward the water. It looks almost choreographed, like a planned water landing demonstration. But it's not planned, it's disaster unfolding in slow motion. On the beach, an off-duty Coast Guard member witnesses the scene and immediately understands what's happening. This isn't a planned event, these people are in trouble. He springs into action, running to organize rescue efforts. He finds people with boats, urges them to launch immediately, coordinates a response as best he can without official resources. But it takes time to get boats launched, to motor out 4 miles offshore, to navigate 4-foot waves. Time that the jumpers hitting the water don't have. The first skydivers hit the water, one after another, splashing down in a rough line, determined by their exit order and the prevailing winds. Those who manage to strip away heavy clothing before impact have a chance. Those still wearing insulated jackets and boots immediately struggle. The clothing absorbs water, becomes heavy, pulls them down. Parachute fabric, designed to catch air and provide lift, now drapes over them in the water, tangling around limbs, covering heads, threatening to suffocate them. Lines that normally provide control now wrap around bodies, creating a web of potential drowning hazards. Some skydivers manage to free themselves from their gear and begin treading water. Others struggle, fighting against equipment and clothing. The waves are rough, 4 feet high, making it difficult to keep heads above water. The lake water is cold, not hypothermia-inducing cold, but cold enough to sap strength and accelerate exhaustion. And they're 4 miles from shore, with no immediate help visible. 2 skydivers, Bernard Johnson and Robert Coy, find themselves close together after landing. Both manage to shed significant gear before impact, but they're still burdened with equipment. They struggle to stay afloat, fighting waves, fatigue, and waterlogged gear. Hope fades as minutes pass with no sign of rescue. Then in the distance, they spot a boat, a private fishing vessel heading in their general direction. They wave frantically. Scream for help. The boat alters course, heading directly toward them. It's a miracle, a reprieve, salvation appearing just when they need it most. The fishing boat pulls alongside, and hands reach down to haul them aboard. Bernard Johnson and Robert Coy are saved. They collapse on the deck, exhausted, hypothermic, traumatized, but alive. As they recover, looking back at the water where their friends are still fighting for survival, both men are filled with anger and confusion. Bernard spots another vessel in the distance, larger than the fishing boat, with a tall radio antenna. As he had struggled to stay afloat before the rescue, he had seen this boat much closer. He had made eye contact with a man on the deck. He had screamed for help, and the boat had continued past him, no more than 20 yards away, making no effort to assist. Why? Why would someone see a person struggling in the water and not help? Was the person on that boat involved in something illegal and afraid to get involved with what would obviously become a major investigation? Was he simply callous? Did he not understand the situation? Nobody will ever know. The mysterious boat with the tall antenna was never identified, but its absence from the rescue effort may have cost lives. If that boat had stopped, if it had radioed for help, if it had pulled even one or two jumpers from the water, the fishing boat that saved Bernard and Robert might have reached more people in time. Back over land, far above the disaster, the B-25 continues its climb toward 30,000 feet for the final two jumpers. The crew requests clearance to ascend to that altitude. Air traffic control initially denies the request. There's conflicting traffic, altitude restrictions, various concerns. The pilot, frustrated but following procedures, redirects toward the Cleveland radio station to plot a new course. After receiving updated guidance, he's eventually cleared to 30,000 feet. The final two skydivers prepare for their jump, excited and nervous for what will be an even higher altitude drop than their companions just completed. 20 minutes after the first drop, the last two skydivers exit the aircraft. They freefall through clear sky, deploy their parachutes, and land safely at Ordner Airfield exactly as planned. They touch down, gather their gear, and look around for their friends. Where is everyone? The first group should have landed 20 minutes ago. There should be 18 skydivers, packing parachutes, sharing stories, reliving the jump. But the landing area is empty. Confusion sets in. Did they land somewhere else? Did the plan change? The B-25 descends and lands. The pilot shuts down engines, expecting to be greeted by the successful completion of a memorable event. Instead, there are questions. Where are the jumpers? Why hasn't anyone from the first group returned? Concern grows. Phone calls are made. Someone mentioned seeing parachutes over the lake. Over the lake. That's impossible. The drop was supposed to be over the airfield, but it's not impossible. It's exactly what happened. And in the cold waters of Lake Erie, the consequences are still unfolding. Rescue boats reach the scene, but they're arriving too late for most. They find abandoned parachutes floating on the waves, jumpsuits drifting, harnesses and helmets bobbing on the surface. But the skydivers who wore them are gone, pulled under by heavy clothing and equipment, exhausted by the struggle to stay afloat, overcome by the cold water and rough conditions. Initially, rescue teams recover only 2 bodies, 2 confirmed dead, 2 confirmed alive. That leaves 14 unaccounted for. The hope is that some managed to swim toward shore, that some found flotation devices, that some are clinging to debris waiting for rescue. But as hours pass and darkness falls, that hope fades. The boats continue searching through the night, but Lake Erie is vast and dark and unforgiving. Over the following days, the lake reveals the truth. Bodies surface or are found by search teams. 16 skydivers, in total, are recovered from the water. 16 experienced parachutists who did everything right, who packed their chutes correctly, who executed their exits properly, who deployed at the correct altitude, but who landed in the wrong place and died because of it, not because of their mistakes, because of a navigation error, because of an air traffic control mistake, because they jumped blind through clouds, trusting that the pilot had positioned them correctly. Bernard Johnson and Robert Coy are the only survivors. 2 out of 20. The other two, the jumpers, who exited at 30,000 feet over the correct drop zone, landed safely and walked away unharmed, unaware, until later of the tragedy that had occurred. But for the 18 who jumped first, 16 are dead and 2 are alive, only because a fishing boat happened to be in the right place at the right time. Within hours of the disaster, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, the Federal Aviation Administration, and local authorities converge on Ordner Airport. They need answers. 20 experienced skydivers boarded a plane for a routine jump. 16 are dead, 2 barely survived. How does this happen? The initial focus is obvious. How did the B-25 end up 12 to 13 miles from the intended drop zone? This isn't a minor navigational error. This is catastrophic misplacement. If the pilot believed he was 3 miles from Ordner Airfield when he was actually over Lake Erie, something went fundamentally wrong with either his navigation or the guidance he received from air traffic control, or both. Investigators pull the audio tapes from Cleveland Air Traffic Control. They reconstruct the radio communications between the B-25, the Cessna, and the controller, and the mistake becomes immediately apparent. The air traffic controller, looking at his radar screen, misidentified which aircraft was which. When the Cessna called in, reporting position near the Cleveland beacon, the controller assumed that radar return was the B-25. He then provided navigational guidance to the actual B-25 based on the Cessna's position. The B-25 pilot, trusting the controller's information, believed he was positioned correctly for the drop when he was actually miles away over open water. This is a shocking error. Air traffic controllers are trained extensively. They're supposed to maintain accurate situational awareness of all aircraft in their sector. Misidentifying aircraft isn't supposed to happen, but it did happen, and 16 people died because of it. But the investigation reveals something even more disturbing. The pilot shares responsibility because even with incorrect guidance from air traffic control, the pilot had other tools available to verify his position. He had VHF navigation equipment. He had visual references when he was below the cloud layer during ascent. He had the Cleveland radio beacon signal. If he had cross-checked his position using multiple methods, standard practice for any pilot, especially when conducting an operation as critical as a skydiving drop, he would have realized something was wrong. He would have known he wasn't where the controller said he was. Instead, he relied solely on air traffic control guidance. He didn't verify, he didn't cross-check, he trusted that the controller was right and positioned the aircraft for the drop based on that trust. It's a human failure, not malicious, not deliberately negligent, but a failure nonetheless. And in aviation, small failures have large consequences. The investigators also examine the decision to proceed with the jump despite the heavy cloud cover. This is where the skydivers themselves bear some responsibility. Every experienced skydiver knows the rule. Don't jump if you can't see your landing zone. It's taught in every training program. It's reinforced through every briefing. Visual contact with the drop zone is essential for safety. Yet all 18 skydivers exited the aircraft knowing there was complete cloud cover below them. They jumped blind, trusting that they would break through the clouds in time to identify the landing zone and steer their parachutes appropriately. Why did they make this decision? Possibly because high-altitude jumps from 20,000 feet were rare and prestigious. Possibly because they'd already waited hours for the weather to improve and didn't want to scrub the event. Possibly because they were experienced enough to be overconfident, believing they could handle whatever conditions they encountered. Whatever their reasoning, jumping into solid cloud cover was a calculated risk, and that calculation proved fatal. One detail emerges as particularly tragic during the investigation: the heavy insulated clothing. At 20,000 feet, temperatures are brutally cold, 20 to 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The skydivers wore multiple layers of insulated clothing, thick jackets, heavy pants, boots designed for extreme cold. This was reasonable preparation for a high-altitude jump over land where they would deploy parachutes at 2,500 feet and land within minutes. The cold exposure time would be relatively brief, but in water, that same clothing became a death trap. Insulated materials absorb water and become extraordinarily heavy. A jacket that weighs 2 pounds dry might weigh 15 or 20 pounds when waterlogged. Multiply that across multiple layers of clothing, heavy boots and equipment, and a skydiver who hit the water could suddenly be trying to stay afloat while carrying 30, 40, 50 pounds of saturated gear. It's nearly impossible. Some skydivers recognized this danger during their 3.5-minute descent after breaking through the clouds. They frantically tried to remove clothing while falling. Boots were kicked off. Jackets were stripped away, but removing clothing during freefall is difficult. You're traveling at over 100 miles per hour. Wind resistance fights every movement. Zippers stick, laces tangle, and you have limited time. You need to deploy your parachute at a safe altitude, which means you can't spend all your remaining freefall time undressing. Those who managed to shed significant clothing before impact had better survival odds. Bernard Johnson and Robert Coy, the two survivors, both removed heavy layers during descent. They hit the water still burdened with equipment, but not so weighed down that immediate drowning was inevitable. They could fight to stay afloat long enough for rescue. Others weren't as successful. They hit the water wearing full insulated clothing. The gear immediately soaked through, pulling them down. Combined with parachute fabric draping over them, parachutes designed to catch air, not shed water, and parachute lines tangling around limbs, they faced an impossible struggle. Even strong swimmers would find it nearly impossible to stay afloat under those conditions in 4-foot waves. The investigation determines that most of the 16 fatalities died from drowning, exhausted by the struggle to stay afloat while burdened with waterlogged clothing and equipment. A few may have become entangled in parachute lines and drowned more quickly, but the underlying cause was the same. They were prepared for a high-altitude jump over land, not a water landing. The clothing that protected them from hypothermia during freefall killed them when they hit Lake Erie. One aspect of the tragedy continues to haunt the survivors and investigators: the mysterious boat with the tall antenna. Bernard Johnson's account is consistent and detailed. While struggling to stay afloat before the fishing boat rescued him, he spotted a larger vessel nearby, close enough that he made eye contact with a man on deck. He screamed for help, waved his arms, made it absolutely clear he was in distress, and the boat continued past him, no more than 20 yards away, making no attempt to assist or even acknowledge his presence. Robert Coy corroborates this account. He also saw the boat. He also believed it was close enough to help multiple skydivers, but chose not to. Both survivors express anger and bitterness about this. They believe that if that boat had stopped, if it had pulled even a few people from the water, if it had radioed for additional rescue boats and provided coordinates, more lives would have been saved. The fishing boat that eventually rescued Bernard and Robert might have reached 3 or 4 or 5 more skydivers in time if they'd been directed more precisely to locations. But the boat with the tall antenna was never identified. Investigators attempt to track it down through harbor records, through interviews with local boat owners, through radio logs if it made any transmissions. Nothing. The boat seemingly vanishes. Nobody comes forward to admit being in the area. Nobody reports seeing skydivers in distress and choosing not to help. The most plausible explanation, shared by many investigators and the survivors themselves, is that whoever was on that boat was engaged in illegal activity, possibly smuggling, possibly fishing violations, possibly something else, and wanted to avoid any contact with authorities. A mass casualty event involving skydivers, Coast Guard, multiple rescue boats, and inevitable federal investigation would be the last thing someone engaged in illegal activity would want to be associated with. So they passed by, pretending not to see people drowning, and disappeared. It's a chilling possibility that someone valued avoiding legal scrutiny more than human lives. That multiple people might have been saved if basic human decency had prevailed over self-interest. But it remains speculation. The boat was never found, the people on board never identified. It's one of the tragedy's unsolved mysteries. In September 1967, 1 month after the disaster, the National Transportation Safety Board releases its findings. The B-25 pilot is found primarily at fault for failing to verify his position before conducting the drop. The FAA air traffic controller is found at fault for misidentifying aircraft on radar and providing incorrect navigational guidance. The 18 skydivers are found to bear some responsibility for jumping into solid cloud cover in violation of basic safety protocols. The pilot's certificate is indefinitely suspended. He loses his license to operate aircraft, effectively ending his aviation career. It's a severe penalty, though many argue it's deserved. 16 people are dead because he didn't verify his position before dropping them over what he believed was land, but was actually open water. The air traffic controller faces disciplinary action through the FAA. He doesn't lose his job. Controller errors, while serious, are often treated as systemic training issues rather than individual failures warranting termination. But his mistake is documented, and he carries the weight of knowing his radar misidentification contributed directly to 16 deaths. But the legal consequences don't end with administrative penalties. The families of the 16 deceased skydivers file wrongful death lawsuits against the FAA, the pilot, the event organizers, and anyone else with potential liability. These cases win through the courts for years. In 1972, nearly 5 years after the disaster, a court finds the FAA responsible for the deaths and awards significant damages to the families. The legal finding is clear. The air traffic controller's error was not just a mistake, but a failure of duty. Air traffic control exists to ensure safe aircraft operation. When a controller provides incorrect navigational information that directly causes deaths, the FAA, as the controller's employer and the regulatory agency responsible for aviation safety, bears legal responsibility. The ruling establishes important precedent about air traffic control liability and reinforces the critical importance of accurate radar identification. One question haunts everyone connected to this tragedy: how do 18 experienced skydivers hit water and only 2 survive? 18 people, 2 survivors, that's an 89% fatality rate. Think about that for a moment. These weren't panicked beginners making rookie mistakes. These were experienced parachutists, some with hundreds of jumps, some who'd been skydiving for years, people who understood survival and had handled emergencies before. They knew what they were doing. They were trained, capable, mentally prepared. So why did 16 of them drown? The answer isn't simple. It's not one catastrophic failure or one fatal mistake. It's 7 different problems converging in the worst possible way, each one individually survivable, but collectively creating an inescapable death trap. Remove any single factor, and maybe a few more people survive. Remove 2 factors, and maybe half make it. But all 7 aligned perfectly, and the result was mass death in cold water, while rescue boats raced to reach them just minutes too late. Start with the clothing, because this might be the single most devastating factor. At 20,000 feet, nearly 4 miles up, temperatures plunge to 20 or 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. That's Arctic conditions. That's cold enough to cause frostbite in seconds, hypothermia in minutes. The B-25 bomber had no insulation, no heating system, just open space and freezing air rushing in. So the skydivers dressed appropriately: heavy insulated jackets designed for extreme cold, thick insulated pants, thermal underwear layers, heavy boots rated for Arctic expeditions, gloves, face protection, multiple layers, creating a protective cocoon against temperatures that would otherwise incapacitate them. For a jump over land, this preparation made perfect sense. You'd be exposed to extreme cold for maybe 10 minutes total, the final portion of ascent and the few minutes of freefall before deploying your parachute. Once the canopy opened, you'd land quickly. The cold exposure time would be brief. The clothing would keep you alive and functional, but in water, that same clothing transforms from life-saving protection to a drowning hazard. Insulated materials absorb water catastrophically. A jacket that weighs 2 pounds dry might weigh 15 or 20 pounds when saturated. Insulated pants add another 10 or 15 pounds. Thermal layers soak through. Heavy boots become anchors. Add it all together, and a skydiver hitting water in full high-altitude gear is suddenly trying to stay afloat while carrying 40, 50, maybe 60 pounds of waterlogged clothing pulling them down. Try to imagine that. You're in 4-foot waves in Lake Erie. You're in shock from realizing you're in water instead of over land. You're dealing with the physical trauma of hitting water at speed. You're tangled in parachute fabric and lines, and you're wearing the equivalent of a 60-pound weight vest actively dragging you under. Even Olympic swimmers in peak condition would struggle. For people who've just experienced 3 minutes of absolute terror during freefall, the exhaustion and shock compound everything. Some skydivers recognize this danger during descent, after breaking through clouds at 4,000 feet and seeing water below instead of the expected airfield. They had about 3.5 minutes until impact. Some used that time trying to strip away heavy clothing while still in freefall. Boots were kicked off. Jackets were wrestled out of. Gloves torn away. Anything that would become waterlogged weight, they tried to shed, but removing clothing during freefall is incredibly difficult. You're traveling at over 120 miles per hour. The wind resistance is enormous. Your hands don't work normally because of wind force and cold. Zippers that normally slide open easily now stick. Jackets with multiple layers don't want to come off. Bootlaces become impossible tangles, and you're working against a deadline. You have to deploy your parachute at safe altitude, which means you can't spend all your remaining freefall time trying to undress. You've got maybe 2 minutes maximum, and 2 minutes isn't enough when you're fighting 120 miles per hour. Winds and cold-numbed fingers, and the sheer awkwardness of stripping layers while falling through the sky. Those who managed to get jackets off, boots removed, heavy outer layers stripped away, improved their survival odds dramatically. Bernard Johnson and Robert Coy, the two survivors, both successfully shed significant clothing during descent. They still hit water, burdened with equipment and some layers, but not so catastrophically weighted that immediate drowning was inevitable. They could fight to stay afloat long enough for rescue. Others weren't as successful. Maybe their jacket zipper stuck. Maybe they focused too much on one item and ran out of time. Maybe they deployed their parachute earlier, prioritizing controlled opening over gear removal. Whatever the reasons, they hit water in full or nearly full high-altitude gear. And the moment that insulated clothing soaked through, they were fighting a losing battle. Now factor in where they landed. 4 miles offshore in Lake Erie. 4 miles, that's not a distance you can swim to safety, even without any burden. Even in calm water, 4 miles is a serious open water swim that would challenge most people. In lake water with waves and currents, it would take hours. Add waterlogged clothing and equipment, and the distance becomes completely insurmountable. You're not swimming anywhere. You're treading water and hoping rescue arrives before exhaustion overwhelms you. The water conditions made everything exponentially worse. 4-foot waves don't sound extreme to people unfamiliar with open water, but when you're in the water trying to stay afloat, those waves are brutal. Every wave that rolls through washes over your head. Every wave forces you to hold your breath, to close your eyes, to momentarily lose sense of which direction is up. Every wave disrupts any stable position you've established. You can't just float peacefully and conserve energy. You're constantly being hit by waves, constantly going under, constantly having to fight back to the surface. The energy expenditure is enormous. In 4-foot waves while burdened with equipment and waterlogged clothing, efficiency becomes impossible. You're fighting constantly. Your legs are kicking hard just to keep your head above surface. Your arms are sculling for balance. You're holding your breath repeatedly as waves wash over you. You're burning energy at an unsustainable rate with no rest, no chance to recover. Within 20 or 30 minutes, even fit, healthy people start to fatigue seriously. Their leg kicks become weaker. Their arm movements lose coordination. They can't hold their breath as long. And in water, fatigue means drowning. The skydivers didn't land in a convenient group where a single rescue boat could quickly recover everyone. They were scattered across a massive area, probably a square mile or more of lake surface. Wind during descent pushed them different directions. Some deployed parachutes at higher altitudes, giving them more time to drift horizontally. Some had better parachute control and could steer. Others tumbled or had partially collapsed canopies and drifted wherever wind took them. By the time all 18 hit water, they were spread out over an enormous search area. This meant rescue boats faced a monumental challenge. They couldn't just motor to one location and start pulling people aboard. They had to search methodically, scanning rough water for signs of parachutes or people difficult to spot in 4-foot waves. When they found someone, they'd pull them aboard, then resume searching for the next person. In rough conditions with people difficult to see, exhausted skydivers struggling to signal, it became a desperate race against time. Every minute spent searching for one person was a minute everyone else remained in the water, getting colder, more exhausted, closer to going under for the last time. The rescue response, while ultimately heroic, was improvised and delayed by the simple fact that nobody expected this situation. There were no Coast Guard boats on standby because Ordner Airport isn't on water, it's inland. The planned drop zone was over the airfield, solid ground miles from Lake Erie. Why would rescue boats be standing by for a land-based operation? So when skydivers started hitting water miles offshore, there was no immediate response capability, no boats ready to launch, no rescue swimmers prepared, nothing. The off-duty Coast Guard member on the beach immediately understood what he was seeing and organized civilian boats, coordinated an improvised rescue operation. He did everything possible, but improvised responses take time. Boats had to be launched, engines started, then a 4-mile run offshore, through 4-foot waves. By the time rescue boats reached the scene, 15 or 20 minutes had passed. For some skydivers, that was manageable. For others, it was too long. Then there's the parachute problem. The canopy that saved your life during descent becomes a nightmare in water. Parachute fabric is designed to catch air, to create drag, to stay inflated. Those properties are exactly what you want in the air. They're exactly what you don't want in water. When you hit the lake, the parachute doesn't neatly collapse. It spreads across the water surface. Wind catches it and drags it, and you attach to it across the water. Waves push it over you, draping fabric across your head, blocking vision, covering your mouth and nose. You can't breathe. You panic. You try to push fabric away, but it's everywhere, and your arms are tangled in parachute lines. Those lines, the cords connecting you to the canopy, wrap around your arms, restricting movement. They tangle around legs, making it impossible to kick effectively. They loop around necks. They create a 3-dimensional maze you have to fight through, while also fighting waves and waterlogged clothing and exhaustion. Some skydivers spent precious minutes trying to free themselves from entanglement, instead of focusing on staying afloat. Others became so hopelessly tangled, they couldn't effectively swim or tread water at all. A few got heads trapped under fabric, couldn't find the edge to breathe, panicked, and inhaled water. Finally, there's the mystery that haunts survivors, the boat with the tall antenna. Bernard Johnson's account is detailed and consistent. While struggling to stay afloat before the fishing boat rescued him, he spotted a larger vessel nearby, close enough that he made direct eye contact with a man on deck, close enough to see the person looking directly at him. Bernard screamed for help, waved his arms, made it absolutely clear he was drowning, and the boat continued past, no more than 20 yards away, making no attempt to assist. Robert Coy saw the same boat and confirms Bernard's description. Both survivors believe that if that boat had stopped, if the person on deck had helped, multiple additional lives would have been saved. The boat was there early, before most rescue vessels. It could have pulled 3, 4, 5 people from water. It could have radioed precise coordinates to incoming rescue boats, but the mystery boat disappeared. Nobody ever identified it. The most likely explanation is that whoever operated that boat was engaged in illegal activity and wanted no part of a mass casualty investigation, so they pretended not to see people drowning and vanished. Put all 7 factors together, and the 89% fatality rate makes horrible sense. Heavy clothing became deadly weight. 4 miles offshore in rough water meant rescue couldn't arrive quickly. Scattered landing pattern made finding everyone difficult. Delayed response meant people stayed in water too long. Parachute entanglement created drowning hazards. A nearby boat that could have helped chose not to. Any one problem alone would be survivable. 2 or 3 together would be extremely challenging, but manageable. All 7 simultaneously created conditions where survival required exceptional luck and exceptional circumstances. Bernard Johnson and Robert Coy had that combination. They shed enough clothing, they landed close enough together that the fishing boat could reach both. They had physical strength and mental toughness to keep fighting when every muscle screamed to give up. But even they acknowledge that luck played a huge role. 5 minutes slower on the fishing boat's arrival, and they would have drowned too. The other 16 fought just as hard, they were just as determined. They kicked just as frantically, they tried just as desperately to stay alive, but the circumstances overwhelmed them. One by one, exhausted beyond endurance, dragged down by waterlogged clothing they couldn't remove, tangled in parachute lines they couldn't escape, battered by waves they couldn't fight anymore, they went under. Most lasted 30 to 45 minutes before drowning. Some made it longer through sheer willpower, but eventually exhaustion wins. Eventually you can't kick anymore. Eventually you go under and don't come back up. 16 people died that way, in sight of rescue boats, in sight of shore, close enough to survival that minutes or different circumstances would have saved them. That's the real horror of Lake Erie. Not that they died in some remote disaster where rescue was impossible, but that they died within reach of help that arrived just a few minutes too late. Watch this episode next. If you found this video interesting, please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.